listener production. Hey, welcome to this final instalment of The Briefing's 5-part series on autism. My name is Sacha Barbour Gatt. All this week, we've been following our colleague Tom as he sought a diagnosis on whether he is neurodivergent. Tom had always suspected he was. Now he knows that he is. We've heard this week about what autism is, how it affects people, and what impact Tom's diagnosis will have on him and those around him. Today, we'll hear about what family and friends can do to support the neurodivergent in their lives. But first, let's hear from Tom and what this diagnosis means for him. He's here in the studio with me. Tom, firstly, thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to shadow you this week while you've been on this incredible journey of discovery. Now, it's been a week since your diagnosis. How did you feel when Professor Gastella confirmed what you'd suspected for most of your life?
It definitely cleared up a bit of a question mark for me, because this whole thing started because I was curious about if that was a thing. And I saw a lot of characteristics in myself that I was seeing in other people who had a diagnosis. And I thought, maybe I align with this, maybe it's just me, or this is something I need to investigate. So to have that clarified by someone who's a professional, I think has given me a lot of ease to understanding myself more.
Was it a relief to hear that diagnosis?
Yeah, definitely, because I don't want to go around masquerading as something that I'm not. So I think to have that label and that clarification, I think, has given me a sense of ease. And yeah, it's made me relaxed in myself as well.
And when you got that diagnosis and he was talking you through it, did it all make sense to you?
Absolutely. I think as I was hearing things about the characteristics of level 1 autism spectrum is like, I think it definitely made a lot of sense. I think I heard things and went, that's me. And I think that was a nice acknowledgement to hear that.
Do you think you'll change your approach to work or relationships because of this diagnosis?
I don't think so, because I think I've got a good relationship with the people I work with, and we've already figured out how that works for each of us. Like, I was talking to my boss about this the other week, and it was something that was speaking about leading up to this, and she was a great encourager of like, this is like completely normal, and like the more that we're learning about this, the more knowledge I guess we have and understanding. And it's not a thing where more people are being autistic or on the autism spectrum, it's we're discovering more people on that spectrum. So I think it's cool to understand that there's a difference between the two and we're getting closer to one.
Are you going to tell HR?
I don't know. That's something that hasn't crossed my mind whatsoever. Do they need to know? I don't know, but maybe we'll find out.
We've been on this amazing journey with you this week, and I'm curious to know how you define autism.
I think autism is different for each person who sits on that spectrum. I think it's definitely intimate, and I think it's unique in each case. There are no two people that are the same. And I think knowing that and understanding that makes it a little more enigmatic, and I think a little bit more interesting to solve and figure out and discover. So I think you will never meet two people on the spectrum who are the same, and I think there's something very, very interesting about that.
And before we let you go, Tom, do you have any advice for people who suspect they might be neurodivergent but have never been diagnosed?
Just have the conversation with someone, whether that's a family member or a colleague or a friend. Just at least talk to someone about it and see what they think. If it's a quest of, hey, is this something that you think is worth sussing out, by all means go do that. And I think more in this day and age, like, people are encouraging of that. And I think the more that you know about this yourself, the more you can nurture yourself as well.
Look, again, Tom, I wanted to thank you on behalf of us here at The Briefing, but also on behalf of our listeners for sharing your journey of discovery with us. I know it took a lot of bravery, and we really appreciate your openness and your vulnerability.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the journey with me.
That was Thomas Denham, one of our colleagues here at Listener. All right, it's time for the final word from Nicole Rogerson. She is the founding CEO and Director of Autism Awareness Australia, with whom we partnered to bring you this series. Nicole, we've heard from Tom there, and I suppose the next question for the people in his circle and the people around him is, how can we support him as he goes through these next steps and these next few months and years of his life?
Well, I think you guys have already been an amazing support network. The fact that Tom identified he might want to do this, he spoke to you guys, felt safe enough to disclose that to you in the workplace, and then you guys to pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, how can we do this better? I mean, you guys have already 10 out of 10, right, in wanting to do the right thing by Tom. Because what we know about people with autism is they will struggle sometimes in the workplace. They may struggle finding a job. Keeping a job may be more about accommodations that the workplace will allow. Adults with autism sometimes report that lights can be too bright, sounds can be too bright, open office spaces terrible. There's a whole range of things about modern workplaces that can be challenging for those people with autism. The fact that you guys have not only accepted this but gone on this journey with him means you've also made yourselves aware through the process of what might make Tom's life easier at work. So you're not only ready to do the work with Tom, but at the same time you're ready to make this podcast and help other workplaces do it. That's hands down the biggest request we get, is to go into workplaces who want to know how to do it better. They're not trying to be bad at it. They just don't understand some of the little tweaks and accommodations that can greatly help people with autism. And mind you, the kinds of tweaks and accommodations that we suggest in a workplace are actually really helpful to a whole gamut of employees.
I'd like the lights dimmer.
Sure. I'd like a quiet place occasionally.
Yeah.
So for people who have gone through this diagnosis, particularly later in life, there might feel some embarrassment or some overreach or a resistance to disclose, when in actual fact, if you're comfortable with it, it's entirely up to the individual, but if you are uncomfortable with it, it might just give everyone context as to why you do the things you do. And if everyone communicates better and accepts one another more and understands that we're all a little bit quirky, then that's a wonderful environment to set up. So Tom's already surrounded by a great team of people. He's got a great job. He's got a great voice, by the way.
He does.
But and I really, part of me, I'd imagine lots of people are listening to this at the moment thinking, I should be so lucky. You know, I should be so lucky to be so accepted and in that environment. And I think it's on us, the rest of the neurotypicals in Australia, to say, how do we go and make Australia more aware and more accepting of people with different neurotypes?
And what about as a community and as a society? Like, what is it that we can do? We've talked about work, and we know his friends and family are probably already going through that journey with him. But what can we do in a broader sense, in a better way?
I think we're starting to see it. Strangely enough, my youngest son, who is not autistic, was at a music festival in Newtown last weekend, and he came home and he said, Mum, they had a sensory room. And my first feeling was, why? Well, I could imagine me setting a sensory room up at an event, but why would a music festival in Newtown? He said, well, everybody just feels a bit overwhelmed occasionally. And so here was this thing that was designed for anyone to go into if they want to, but it doesn't exclude people who are on the autism spectrum. So the more we can think about doing those things, which is making environments like, sensory rooms or sensory hours at a grocery store. That doesn't mean we want people with autism to only go to a grocery store at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. That's not the goal of sensory hour. It's just that if you're feeling pretty overwhelmed, you know that's a pretty good time to go. And the more we normalise those things and make them available to all Australians, then the more benefit autistic Australians will get from them as well.
What about to the people who say, it's too hard and it requires too much change and I don't have the time or the money or the effort to do it?
Those people are hard to budge, but you know what? Autism always ends up coming into their life. You know, if you don't have a child with autism, you might have a grandchild with one, you'll certainly have a neighbour with one, and you'll have a relative with one. So I think sometimes awareness has to be, sometimes people are a little late to the party and it takes them a little time to get there, but there's lots of those social movements over the years that we've seen. Typically older generations of people just take a little bit longer to get to that place that says the world's not so black and white. So it's those of us that are playing out in the grey zone. It's our job to show what good looks like. And I think this program and Tom is what good looks like, definitely.
Nicole, thank you so much for being with us throughout Tom's journey.
Thank you for having me.
That was Nicole Rogerson, founding CEO and Director of Autism Awareness Australia, with whom we partnered to bring you this series. Now, before we wrap up, there is a link in the show notes to a stack of resources from Autism Awareness Australia. They've put that together to help you and us navigate autism to be better colleagues, friends, and family members. And we'd also like to thank Professor Adam Gostella and his team at the Brain and Mind Centre at Sydney University for partnering with us as well. And we'll put a link to the clinic in the show notes too. And that is all we have time for in this final episode of the What If I'm Autistic series on The Briefing. Before you go, we would absolutely love it if you could share these EPs with someone who you think might like to hear them or might benefit from them. And remember, if you want to keep up with our other content, we are on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. We're also on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. And of course, don't forget to check back in the feed tomorrow morning at 6 for another episode of The Weekend Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next time.